I'm Betty Hicks, and I'm with the Ohio River Valley chapter of the American Red Cross in Portsmouth, Ohio.
What's your title at the Red Cross?
Volunteer.
Okay.
Recipient. How about that? I'm a recipient. You go from being one to being the other, so I'm a recipient of their services. If we start at the very beginning, which starts way back in the early 1960s, when as a young child I was visiting my sister in Kansas City, Missouri, and we spent the night in the basement because of tornadoes hitting the Kansas City area. And I woke up the next morning and we were fortunately okay, but Topeka, Kansas had been pretty much wiped off the face of the earth from a tornado or a series of tornadoes. And I remember sitting and watching the little black and white TV set and seeing all of these people running around with these little black crosses on and thinking, wow, you know, that's neat that they were there doing all of that. And I was probably about 10 years old at the time. And that was my first insight into the Red Cross. Of course, I thought they were black crosses, but it was Red Cross. And then back in the 70s, I started to work for the Veterans Administration. And we had what was called the Combined Charitable Campaign. And through the Combined Charitable Campaign, we had a lot of blood drives at the VA for the Veterans Administration Center. So I got to be a part of the blood drives at the VA. And I got to see how the Red Cross helped the military in the veterans there and the different services that they provided, like getting them home when something happened to their families, and their blood donorship again, and just different programs. And then in the early 80s, my children's great-grandmother passed away suddenly. And she only had one son still alive, and we had no idea where he was. And somebody said, call the Red Cross. So we did. We picked up the phone, we called the Red Cross, and within 24 hours, they had not only located him. Now, we're in southern Missouri, but they found him someplace in Texas and already had him on his way home to his mother's funeral. Just that fast that we had him back in Missouri for the funeral. So we went from that to me going back to work at the VA and working more firsthand because I helped with the Combined Charitable Campaign. And then I moved to Ohio. And in Ohio, I became the executive director of our local United Way and worked closely with the Red Cross on so many different things and saw their programs firsthand. And we had a prison riot back in the early 90s. And my husband was immediately called out to be on the lines outside of the prison. And I'm on the phone with the Red Cross because I had just had back surgery, and I'm saying, what can we do to help? How can we be there? Because everybody in our community was up and wanting to do something. And they needed pillows. They were setting up shelter for all the families throughout the state that were coming in to be close to where the prison was to get first word of what their inmates or their working members were doing in the prisons. So from home, I'm calling the hospital to see if they have extra pillows, and somebody else is picking the pillows up and they're taking them out, and Red Cross has set up the shelter and they're feeding these people, so I got to see them working in that way. And then a few years ago, my husband was diagnosed with cancer, and in his treatments for the cancer, there were different times that he needed different forms or parts of the blood that was being raised through the Red Cross or brought in through the Red Cross. So I got to see that being used in my husband's care. My son, who was a lifeguard, took his lifeguard classes at the American Red Cross, you know. So it's a lot of different things there. And then shortly after my husband died, the local Red Cross recognized him as the Firefighter Hero of the Year. So I got to see that part of the Red Cross too. And then on August the 15th of this last year, my house burned. And I was out of town. I got a phone call at 5 o'clock in the morning. I've got my daughter, my 3 grandchildren who live with me. And we got in the car and headed home. It's a 9-hour drive from where we were home. all the time thinking, where are we going to sleep tonight? What are we going to do? How are we going to get by when we get there? When I reached our house, which was burned, there was the American Red Cross. They had already arranged for a room for us. They took us in. They, that night, showed up with a care package for my grandchildren because their blankets were gone, their stuffed animals were gone. And here was a box with stuffed animals and little blankets and personal toiletries for Crystal and I. And we had a pillow and a warm bed, and we had food that night. And they were there to help us find someplace else to live, to get us settled in that someplace else to live. And they've kind of been my crutch. You know, this hasn't been that many months ago. It's been about 6 months, and there they've been. When I've needed to turn to somebody to talk to, there they are. So that's my dealings with the American Red Cross. They've been there since I was probably about 10 years old, that I've had some connection throughout my life with the American Red Cross. Both, you know, people don't understand that it doesn't have to be a monetary contribution to the American Red Cross to give a big impact. Your time, your services, the things you have at your fingertips that maybe they need, you know, you never know what you can give to the Red Cross that can be helping somebody else someplace else. It's always amazed me how the Red Cross could be in Portsmouth, Ohio, taking care of this one family with their little need, when someplace else in the world there's a hurricane, there's, you know, something else going on, there's floods, and they have volunteers and they have stations set up and they've got all of this going on, and yet they're still giving me that individual care. So I guess the one thing about Red Cross is that it's not just the monetary contributions, although those are greatly needed, okay? It's the time and the effort and the resources that are needed too. So the American Red Cross to me was security, it was motivation, it was hope. And that's what they gave me, because on the worst day of my life, where I thought everything was gone, and I say everything as in things, possessions were gone, the Red Cross says, you know what, it's okay, we can rebuild, we can do it again, you're going to be okay. And they just gave me that, I'm going to be okay. I had just lost my husband, you know, who was my support, and the Red Cross stepped in and they gave me that support, and they allowed me to keep my dignity and to know that everybody needs help at some time in their life, and they were there to give me that help. And what that meant to me was that I could be there for the people around me that needed my help, because I still had my daughter and my grandchildren that needed me to be strong, and the Red Cross helped me to be strong.